Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolute core mechanics of how businesses operate. It's so easy to look at these massive, multinational corporations today and just assume they were always untouchable giants, right? But honestly, that's rarely the case. To really get a grip on the foundations of business, we're going to kick things off by looking at one of the most famous success stories of all time and use it to decode exactly what makes a company tick. Let's dive right in.
Picture this. It's 1976. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak start Apple in a literal garage with a measly $1,300. But man, talk about a roller coaster. Jobs, who was this brilliant but notoriously demanding visionary, actually got ousted from his own company at age 30 by John Sculley, the exact guy he had hired to be president. Wild, right? Jobs didn't even return until 1993 to rescue what was then a struggling, nearly bankrupt Apple. Fast forward through his massive comeback and the subsequent leadership of Tim Cook, and by 2022, Apple was flirting with a jaw-dropping $3 trillion valuation. It just became an absolute juggernaut.
And just to put that kind of massive scale into perspective for a second, this incredibly volatile startup journey, it ultimately generated over $365 billion in sales in the year 2021 alone. It's almost hard to wrap your head around that level of explosive growth, going from a cramped California garage to, well, that.
So, to understand how a company actually grows from a garage to a global empire, here's our roadmap for today. We just touched on the Apple story, and next up, we'll define business and profit, identify the key players, explore the functional areas of business, and finally, map out the macro environment using the Pestel model.
All right, moving right along to Section 1, Defining Business and Profit. Let's strip it down to the absolute basics. What exactly is a business, and what's the end game? Fundamentally, a business is literally any activity that provides goods or services to consumers for the purpose of making a profit. Now, these can be tangible goods you can hold in your hand, like an iPhone or a Mac, or they can be intangible services. Think of your internet provider, a local hospital, an airline, or even the movie theater. And actually, a lot of companies, like a local car dealership, do both. They sell you the physical car, and they sell you the repair services to keep it running.
Now, a super crucial point here is untangling two terms that get mixed up all the time: revenue and profit. Revenue is the total funds an enterprise receives in exchange for its goods or services. It's all the cash flowing in the front door. Profit, on the other hand, is what's actually left over, fingers crossed, after every single bill is paid. When Jobs and Wozniak soldered together the very first Apple I, they did it with the ultimate goal of making a profit.
But wait, you might be wondering, what about organizations that aren't actually out to make money? Well, while groups like the American Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity, or even your local university are nonprofits, meaning they focus on social or educational services instead of padding owners' pockets, they still rely on the exact same foundational business principles. They have to set goals, manage their resources, and operate highly efficiently if they want to survive.
Which brings us to Section 2, Key Players and Stakeholders.
Okay, so we know what a business is, but who are the people actually making it tick? The main participants basically fall into three interconnected buckets. First up, you've got the owners. Their main gig is to invest the money and gather the resources to turn a neat idea into a reality. Then, those owners hire employees to do the heavy lifting and hit the company's goals. And finally, both the owners and the employees depend 100% on the third group, the customers. At the end of the day, a business absolutely has to satisfy its customers' needs to generate that golden profit.
But the circle of people who actually care about a business is way bigger than just those three groups. We call this broader crowd stakeholders. A stakeholder is basically anyone with a legitimate interest in the success or failure of a business and the policies it adopts. So this casts a much wider net, pulling in the vendors who supply the raw materials, the landlords renting out the office space, and the bankers footing the loans.
And here is where it gets tricky, because this dynamic creates one of the biggest headaches in running a company. Stakeholder interests conflict all the time. Trying to keep everyone happy is a massive juggling act. Think about it, your bank or your lenders. They want you charging high prices to ensure their loans get repaid. But your customers, they obviously want the lowest prices humanly possible. Navigating that tug of war is a daily reality for any business.
Let's shift gears to Section 3, Functional Areas of Business.
To balance out all those conflicting demands, a business has to organize its internal activities. I like to think of a company as this giant, complex machine made up of 5 core gears. You have management, which plans out and leads the resources,
Operations handles the gritty work of converting those resources into actual goods or services. Marketing is out there identifying what the customer needs and promoting the products. Accounting is measuring and communicating the financial data. And lastly, finance secures and manages the funds required to keep growing. For a company to succeed, these 5 areas literally have to run in perfect sync.
And now for Section 4, the Pestle Macro Environment Model.
So here's the harsh reality. Having a brilliantly structured internal engine just isn't enough because businesses do not operate in a vacuum. They are constantly being battered by massive external forces that they have little to no control over. To make sense of this, we use the PESTLE acronym. Think of it as a survival radar for mapping the macro environment. It stands for political forces, like taxes and tariffs, economic forces, like market growth, sociocultural forces, like shifting demographics or trends, technological forces, like the explosion of the internet, environmental forces, dealing with natural resources and pollution, and legal forces, like labor laws and court decisions.
Let's ground this in the real world. Think about the fast food industry. They are on a constant treadmill adapting to this macro environment. They have to navigate strict FDA regulations, so that's political and legal. They're facing intense sociocultural pressures as everyday consumers demand healthier menus. And they're dealing with massive environmental pushes, which is exactly why you've seen so many chains completely ditching styrofoam containers lately.
Or take a look at the auto industry. A huge shift in sociocultural attitudes toward the environment, totally combined with some incredibly exciting new technological capabilities, has sparked an absolute wildfire of growth in the all-electric vehicle market. Companies like Tesla and Nissan jumped all over this, and because of that, the EV market was projected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of over 21% between 2019 and 2030. That is a perfect example of external forces directly creating massive business opportunities.
Which brings us to a frankly massive, disruptive real-world event. Where exactly does something like a global pandemic, like COVID-19, fit into this whole macro-environmental model?
Well, while a pandemic technically slots in under broader natural or environmental forces, its economic impact was completely fractured. Just look at this stark contrast. On one hand, tourism businesses suffered absolutely catastrophic revenue losses, leading to unprecedented layoffs. But on the flip side, manufacturers of personal protective equipment, PPE, were suddenly slammed by this massive, desperate surge in demand. It just shows how the exact same external force can be a fatal blow to one industry and an absolute goldmine for another.
We actually saw really similar sweeping impacts back during the 2008 economic crisis. Credit markets completely froze up, banks slammed the brakes on making loans, and consumer confidence just plummeted. Even an unstoppable force like Apple, which had been riding high on strong sales for years, suddenly had to drastically slash production of the iPhone in the fall of 2008. Why? Simply because cautious, strapped consumers just didn't have the cash or the credit to spend no matter how cool the gadget was.
So, I'm going to leave you with this thought. If even a $3 trillion giant like Apple, with all its world-class management and brilliant marketing, can be completely shaken by these macro-environmental forces, what unseen external pressures are silently making or breaking the future of the businesses you interact with every single day? Keep your eyes peeled on those pestle forces, because they are literally writing the future of business as we speak. Thanks for joining us on this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.